Today I'm going to be talking about verses 3 to 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār. In verse 3, Bhagavan, after saying in verse 2 that action does not give liberation, and as I mentioned last time, Bhagavan even says in Sanskrit, in Tamil he says, vidu tarile, that's at the end of verse 2, that means does not give liberation. He's referring to karma there. Karma does not give liberation. In Sanskrit, he says gati nirodhakam, that means action obstructs liberation. But then in verse 3, he qualifies this by saying kākkuniṭ ākkum niṭkāmiya kaṇmam karuttai tirutti dundīpaṛa gativaṛi kāṇbikkum dundīpaṛa. What that means is kākkuniṭ ākkum means done for God. Niṭkāmiya karma, that is, niṭkāmiya karma means action which is not motivated by desire. So kākkuniṭ ākkum niṭkāmiya kaṇmam is the subject of the verse. That means action not motivated by desire, but done for God. Done for God here means done with love for God. In the Malayalam version, sorry, I've got to take the book. In the Malayalam version, he says, Ishwara pritiyanai. Pritiyanai means with love for God. Let's say now just the verse. Or for love of God. So Ishwara pritiyanai, for love of God. So that is the implication of when in Malayalam Bhagavan wrote in a longer meter, so he was able to be a bit more explicit of some of his ideas. So what he implies by kākkuniṭ ākkum, which literally means done, done for God, what he implies by that is done for the love of God. So action done without desire, but for the love of God. That is action which is not motivated by desire, but motivated by love for God. Karuttai tirutti means purifying the mind, or even more precisely, rectifying the mind. But rectifying the mind implies here purifying the mind. In Sanskrit, he says chitta sodakam. That means purifying the mind. In Tamil, it's rectifying. That means rectifying here is used in the sense of removing the impurities. Aḥdu gativaṛi kāṇbikkum. That it will show the way to liberation. So the whole verse means desireless action done for God, purifying the mind, it will show the way to liberation. What he means by it will show the way to liberation, it will enable one to recognize what is the correct path to liberation. That is, the impure mind will not be ready, will not be able to recognize or will not be able to accept what is the correct path to liberation. Only when the mind is to a great extent purified and ready to surrender itself, will it be willing to accept what the correct path to liberation is. The correct path to liberation, though Bhagavan doesn't say it here, he implies very clearly throughout this work, that is not in every verse, but you take all the verses together, Bhagavan is dealing with the subject very systematically. And every group, among the first 15 verses, each group of verses leads up to self-investigation, which he mentions in verse 8. That is, today I'm going to be talking about verses 3 to 8. So this series of verses, which are talking about the path of niṭkāmiya karma and bhakti. That is, Bhagavan doesn't take karma yoga and bhakti yoga is two separate paths. They're one and the same path, because the karma can only be a means to union with God if it is done with love. So in verses 3 to 8, the verses I'm talking about today, he's talking about the path of bhakti and karma. And in verse 8, he refers to the path of self-investigation, not indirectly using the term ananya bhava, which means meditation on what is not other. That means what is not other than oneself. So meditation on what is not other than oneself means meditation on oneself. In other words, self-investigation. Likewise, in verses 10 to 14, he's talking about the path of yoga. That's a Raja yoga. And there he says, when the mind is, if the mind is if the mind is kept in check by pranayama, if it is directed on the vaṛi, what he refers to as vaṛi can be interpreted in two ways. It can mean vaṛi, the path of investigation, the investigating path, or it can mean the one path. Even if we take it as one path, it refers to the one and only path of self-investigation, because that is the only means to destroy the mind. So all the verses, in the first 15 verses, though he talks about other paths, they're all leading up to self-investigation, because it is only by self-investigation that we can surrender ourselves completely. So the path of self-investigation and self-surrender is the correct path to liberation. But in order to be willing to, in order to be able to recognize that and be willing to accept it, requires a certain degree of purity of mind. That is, so long as our mind is full of outward-going desires, it will not be willing to surrender itself, and therefore it will not be willing to accept that this is the only means to self-investigate, to liberation. When he says purifying the mind, or as I say more literally here, he talks about rectifying the mind, but that means removing the impurities from the mind. What are the impurities in the mind? They are the vishaya vasanas. That is the inclination to be aware of or to experience vishaya. Vishaya means phenomena, things other than ourselves. So long as we have a desire to experience anything other than ourselves, that is drawing our mind outwards, away from ourselves. So those are the impurities in our mind. And they may be, there are different degrees of impurity, but so long as there's the slightest taste to go outwards, to experience anything other than ourselves, the mind is still not perfectly pure. There's still impurities in the mind. So purifying the mind means reducing the strength and intensity of the impurities. In other words, the outward going vishaya vasanas. How this is reduced by niṭkāmiya karma? Well, the action itself doesn't, no action by itself will bring about purification of the mind. The key here is the starting words of this verse, kātāṇukku ākkum. It is done for God, or done for the love of God. It is what purifies the mind is not the actions that are done, but the love with which they are done. It's the love for God that alone will purify the mind. So this is what he, so the subject, in this verse, he's introducing the subject that he's going to deal with in the subsequent 5 verses, which is the subject of purification of mind. How the mind is purified by niṭkāmiya karma done with the love of God, by desireless action done for the love of God, or done with love for God. We can take it either way. So that is verse 3. last time I had talked about this verse, but why I talk about it again now is that this is the starting point for this series of verses. In verse 4, having said that desireless action done for the love of God will purify the mind and show the way to liberation, he then begins to discuss this subject in more detail. He begins by, in verse 4, by considering what are the actions that we can do for the love of God without desire for any result. He introduces it here in verse 4. He says, diḍamidu pūjai jepamun dhiyāṇam muḍalvāk kuḻattoṛi lundīpaṛa viavahum dundīpaṛa. What that means is, diḍamidu, this is certain. He begins this verse by saying, this is certain. Diḍamidu, this is certain. Pūjai jepamun dhiyāṇam. That is puja, japa, and dhiyāṇa. Puja means worship. Japa means repetition. And dhiyāṇa means meditation. So puja, japa, and dhiyāṇa, muḍalvāk kuḻattoṛi. They are actions of udal, the body, speech, vāk, the speech, and ullam, the mind, respectively. In other words, puja is an action of the body, japa is an action of the speech, and meditation or dhiyāṇa is an action of the mind. And then he says in the most important part of this verse is the final line. He says, "Viru ahum ondril ondru." That literally means one than one is superior. In some of these verses, Bhagavan is expressing the ideas in a very, very terse, brief manner. So we have to expand it, because one than one is superior. What exactly does that mean? What it implies is that each succeeding one is superior to the previous one. So japa is better than puja, and dhiyāṇa is better than japa. That is the implication. One than one is superior. So the meaning of the whole verse is, this is certain. Puja, japa, and dhiyāṇa are actions of body, speech, and mind. One than one is superior. That is the literal meaning. What that implies is that puja, that is worship, japa, repetition of a name of God or a sacred phrase, and dhiyāṇa, meditation, are respectively actions of body, speech, and mind. And hence, in this order, each subsequent one is superior to the previous one. In what sense is it superior? What does he mean here by viru, superior? The subject of this series of verses is purification of the mind. So what he implies by the word viru, superior, here is it is more effective. It is a more effective means to purify the mind. Why is this the case? Because actions done by the body are relatively gross. Actions done by the speech are more subtle. Actions done by the mind are still more subtle. If you're doing puja, supposing you're doing ritual worship to an idol, it's easy to go through the motions while the mind is off somewhere else wandering. So it's not so easy to detect the wandering of the mind when the attention is on something, on a physical thing, on something external. It's external in a physical sense. It's easier to detect the wandering of the mind with when doing japa, because that's done by speech. It's still easier to detect the wandering of the mind when doing dhiyāṇa, because dhiyāṇa is an action entirely by the mind. So if the mind gets distracted to something else, we're no longer doing the dhiyāṇa. We can go on mechanically doing puja or even japa we can do mechanically while the mind is wandering off thinking other things. But in meditation, as soon as our mind wanders off to something else, we're no longer doing meditation. So the more subtle actions are more effective in purifying the mind, because it's easier to detect where the mind is actually, what the mind is actually occupied with. In dhyāna, in all three, the mind should wholly be occupied with God, because it's for the love of God that we are doing it. But if our mind is distracted off and we're thinking of some other matter while doing the puja, we won't notice it so easily. We'll still feel we've done the puja very correctly. We've performed all the correct actions and done it in the proper way. We'll feel we've done a good puja, even though we may have been worrying about worldly problems, about business problems or work problems or financial problems or this or that. We may be thinking about those while doing the puja, but we feel satisfied that we've done the puja because we've done all the actions correctly. With japa, we feel we're repeating the name of God, even though our mind may be thinking of something else. With dhyāna, as soon as we're thinking something else, we're no longer meditating on God. So that is why the more subtle actions are more effective in purifying the mind than the grosser actions. So here he talks about three types of actions: actions by body, actions by speech, and actions by mind. Actions by body he calls puja. So in the next three verses, he talks about each one of these in turn. So in verse 5, he talks about puja. What does he mean by puja? What is puja? What is worshipping God? In order to understand this verse, the opening words of verse 5 are en uru. What this refers to is en uru. It actually has two meanings, but I'll talk about the main meaning first. En here means, according to one meaning, en means 8. So en uru means 8 forms. This refers to a Shaiva Siddhanta idea called, which is in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit term for it is Ashtamurti. That Ashtamurti means the 8 forms. That is the 8 forms or manifestations of Shiva, which are sometimes there's a slightly different classification, but the most common classification is that the 8 forms are the 5 elements. That's earth, water, fire, air, and space, plus sun, moon, and sentient beings. For sentient beings, in some cases, it said the priest who is doing the sacrificial, that is Vedic sacrifices. So, but as I say, in different texts, they're explained in a slightly different way, but the easiest way to take it is that the 8th one is sentient beings, jivas. So all material things are said to be made up of these 5 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Here, earth doesn't literally just mean the soil of the ground. It means solid things. Water is liquid things. Fire is clear. Air is gaseous things, and space is that in which all these are contained. So basically, earth, water, fire, air, and space constitute all material things. So all material things are forms of God. And among these material things, 2 that are considered very special, it's a sun and moon. Sun is considered special for various reasons. One is Surya is considered a god in Hinduism, and some Hindus are devotees of Surya, of the sun. They take the physical form of the sun as an embodiment of that deity. Why is the sun worshipped? Because the sun is, life on this earth is sustained by the sun. Without the sun, there would be no life on this earth. So, so the sun is held in high reverence. So the sun, for its life-giving properties, is considered to be a form of God. The moon is also considered, because the moon is considered, firstly, the moon gives light in the darkness. If you live in a hot tropical country like India, moonlight is considered as very cooling, very soothing, very calming, compared to the fire of the sun in the daytime. When the moon comes out at night, it's a cool, calm, calming effect. So that is one reason why the moon is also considered as a form of Shiva. And also sun and moon also have a symbolic meaning. Sun can refer to, can be a metaphor for the light of awareness in our heart, and the moon can be a metaphor for mind, which is just like the moon, the light of the moon is a reflection of the sunlight. The awareness of the mind is a reflection of the original awareness. So these ideas can be explained in different levels of explanation. But anyway, after the 5 elements, sun and moon are also considered. And finally, living beings, sentient beings. So all of these are forms of Shiva. That is the idea in Shaiva Siddhanta. In other words, there's nothing that is not a form of Shiva. I mean, this covers everything. It covers all material things and also all sentient things. So everything is a form of Shiva. That is the idea behind this Ashtamurti. But all these 8 are 8 forms of Shiva. Shiva means God. So what Bhagavan says, oh, that's one meaning of Ennuru. En also in Tamil means thought. So Ennuru we can also interpret as thought forms. According to Bhagavan, the whole world is nothing but thought. He says it explicitly in Nana, in the 4th paragraph. He says, Ninevu galai tabitu, jagam endro porol anyamai illai. That means excluding thoughts, there is not separately any such thing as the world. So according to Bhagavan, all physical phenomena, that's the world, are nothing but mental phenomena, that is thoughts. So Ennuru can also mean thought forms. That's another, all these 8 forms of Shiva, they're also, that is 5 elements, the sun, the moon, and the jiva, they're all thoughts. The jiva is the first thought, the thought what Bhagavan often refers to as nananam ninevu, the thought called I, which means the false awareness I am this body. And the other 7 are all material forms, which according to Bhagavan are nothing but thoughts or mental phenomena. So that is the meaning of Ennuru. Ennuru Yavam, oh wait a second, I'll just read the whole verse. Now I've explained Ennuru, I'll read the whole verse. Ennuru Yavam Ireyu Amena, Eni vaṛi padal undīpaṛa, Isun nal pusane undīpaṛa. Ennuru Yavam, all the 8 forms, all the thought forms, Ireyuru Am, all the 8 forms are forms of God. Any thinking or considering that all the 8 forms are forms of God, considering thus, worshipping, Varipadal means worshipping, considering that all the 8 forms are forms of God, is good isan nalpusane. It's good worship of God. It's good puja of God. So what Bhagavan implies here is it doesn't matter what we worship, so long as we have the attitude that what we are worshipping is God, that is good worship of God. So we can worship a stone, and if we are considering that stone as a manifestation of God, that is good worship of God. Provided, of course, that we're doing it with love for God, not doing it. I mean, many people who worship God are worshiping for some personal benefit. If we're in financial problems, we worship God or pray to God to remove our financial difficulties. If we had this problem or that problem, we pray to God to remove our problems. If we have some desire, I want to become a successful politician or something, I go to the temple or church or mosque or whatever, and I worship God, thinking that God, if I have God on my side, then I'll be successful in my political career. It can be so many things. But that is not what Bhagavan is talking about here, because in verse 3, he talked about kāruttaṉukku ākkum niṭkāmiya karma. So it's so long as we have desire for so long as we are doing any type of puja, japa, or dhiyāṉa for some personal gain, that is kāmiya karma. That's action done for fulfillment of a desire. That is not what Bhagavan is talking about here. What Bhagavan is talking about here is niṭkāmiya karma. Puja or japa or dhiyāṉa should not be for the fulfillment of any desire. It should be just done for the love of God. So if we are worshipping any form, any physical form, considering it to be a form of God, that is good worship of God. That's what Bhagavan says here. So sometimes people, there's a general idea that niṭkāmiya karma means doing social service of some form or other. That is doing service to people. Or could also be doing service to other sentient beings, animals or something, but that is niṭkāmiya karma. Bhagavan gives a much broader definition, and Bhagavan links it to the path of bhakti. So even if you worship a stone or a tree or the sun or the moon or any whatever you worship, if you're worshiping it, taking it to be God and worship it with love for God, then that is good worship. So if we, one of the 8 forms is the sentient beings, jivas. So if we are trying to alleviate the sufferings of others, whether human or non-human, and if we are doing it not for any personal gain or not even for the satisfaction of doing, to gain the satisfaction of I'm doing something good, we're doing it just for the love of God because we see God in that sentient being, then that is good worship of God. If I'm supposing I'm a very rich person and I want to have a name for myself by being a big philanthropist, I may do so much to help poor people or to alleviate suffering here or there, but I'm not doing it, why I'm doing it is because I want to gain the name and fame that I'm a great philanthropist. That is not what Bhagavan is talking about here. If we see someone, or someone means any living being, any sentient being suffering or in any way, if we try to alleviate that suffering purely for the love of God, not for any other reason, not even for the satisfaction of doing something good, then that is good worship of God. So the common idea that niṭkāmiya karma means doing service of one form or another, it is included here, but it's not the only, that's included, but that's not, niṭkāmiya karma is not exclusively that. even doing worship, going to church or mosque or temple or gurudwara or whatever, or synagogue or whatever, and worshipping with pure love for God, that is good worship. So here Bhagavan just gives a very broad definition of puja. It's not only the ritual worship, it can be any form of worship. But the key, what makes it good worship is, the key to good worship is that love for God and considering whatever we are worshipping to be a form of God. So if we go to help poor people, for example, we should do so not with the idea that they are poor and I'm better than them, I'm able to help them. We should do it with the attitude that God is in the form of that poor person. So I'm worshipping God in the form of that poor person by alleviating their suffering, giving food or education or whatever type of service we may be doing. We're doing it because we see God in them. Then only is it good worship of God. So verse 5, he deals with puja. Verse 6, he deals with japa. This verse is, Sadhguru used to say, sometimes Bhagavan's Tamil is like telegraph English. In old days when messages were sent by telegram, they were sentences without verbs, or they weren't complete sentences because you have to pay for every letter you send by the telegram. So people try to keep the message as brief as possible. Likewise, nowadays, when we send text, particularly young people, when they send text messages, they try to abbreviate everything. If they want to say you are, they put the letter you are. Like that, they try to compact everything. So in this way, Bhagavan has, in the tradition of sutras, Bhagavan has compacted a lot into, sometimes a lot into a very few words. So this verse is possibly the most compact verse well, it's among all the verses of Bhagavan that I can think of, this is the one that is most compact because a lot is implied, but is not explicitly said. What he says in this verse is, Varutilil Vakucha Vaikul Japatil Virupamam Manadam Undīpaṛa Vilambum Dhiyāṇam Idundīpaṛa. I can't remember whether I mentioned last time, the word in the second and third line, or actually it's truly speaking, it's the end of the first half of the second line and the end of the second half of the second line, because though it's printed as 3 lines, actually the last 2 lines are 1 line divided into 2. So this word Undīpaṛa occurs twice in every verse at the end of the second and third lines. This has no special meaning, it has no particular meaning, it is just part of the meter. So we have to take the words, we have to omit that when we are interpreting the meaning of a verse. So if we split it up into words, what Bhagavan says here is Varatilil, Vakucha, Vaikul, Japatil, Virupamam, Manadam, Vilambam, Dhiyāṇam, Idu. That's all the words. Varatilil means than praising. That implies rather than praising. Uccavaku. Uccavaku means in a loud voice. Vaikul Japatil means rather than japa. Rather than japa within the mouth. Manadam Virupamam. What is done by mind is beneficial. Dhiyāṇam, Vilambam Dhiyāṇam Idu. This is called dhiyāṇa. what he means by this is, we have to expand the meaning. So as I say, the literal meaning is, rather than praising in a loud voice, rather than japa within the mouth, what is done by mind is beneficial. This is called dhiyāṉa. So we have to expand the earlier part of the verse. When he says rather than praising, the implication is, rather than praising means singing, praising God by singing hymns. That implies doing it aloud. Japa or repetition of his name is beneficial. That's the implication of the first word, vaṛi. Then the second group of words, Vākucha means in a loud voice. What that implies is, rather than japa done in a loud voice, japa whispered faintly within the mouth is beneficial. And then, because we have to link each group with the next group to make sense of it. So rather than praising God, doing japa is good. Rather than japa done in a loud voice, japa whispered faintly within the mouth is beneficial. And then he says, Vaikul japatil, rather than japa done within within the mouth, manadam virupamam. That is, rather than japa within the mouth, manadam means manasa, that what is done by mind. Virupamam is beneficial. In what sense is each one of these more beneficial than the previous one? In the sense that it's a more effective means to purify the mind. So the implication is that japa is a more effective means of purifying the mind than singing praises of God, and praising God by chanting hymns. So japa is better than that. Better than japa done in a loud voice. Japa whispered faintly in the mouth is beneficial. And rather than japa within the mouth, mental japa is beneficial. This again is like, as he's in verse 4, the grosser actions are less, that is, the subtler actions are more effective in purifying the mind than the grosser actions. But again, we have to remember here, that what is purifying the mind is not the action itself, but the love with which it's done. But the subtler the action, the more focused the love is. That is, you can be singing hymns aloud while you're thinking of other things. You can even be doing japa aloud while thinking of other things. So as the action becomes more subtle, less physical, and more closer, more mental, then that is more effective in purifying the mind. And he said, after saying that the manadam virupamam, that is the mental, what is done by mind is beneficial. He refers to that mental japa or manasika japa. He refers to it by saying, idu dhiyāṇam vilumbam dhiyāṇamidu. That means idu dhiyāṇam vilumbam. That this is called dhiyāṇa. So if the japa is done mentally, that is also a form of meditation. So he's providing a link between this verse and the next verse where he talks about meditation. He's not saying here that mental japa is the only form of meditation, but it is a form of meditation. So rather than singing hymns, better to do japa. Rather than japa done aloud, it's better to do it softly within the mouth. And better than doing it softly within the mouth, it's better to do it mentally. That is the general idea of this verse. And if you do it mentally, that is a form of dhiyāṇa. And as I say, this is in all these verses, from verse 4 onwards, he's grading, he's putting all these different practices in context and grading them in their according to their efficacy, their potential efficacy in purifying the mind. And then in verse 7, having talked about puja and japa, now he talks about dhiyāṇa. And what he says in this verse is, Vittu karuttalin arune vichipol vittida dunnalai undīpaṛa visedamam unnavai undīpaṛa. What that means is Vittu karuttalin. That literally means rather than meditating leaving, or rather than meditating leavingly. The leaving, vittu, here is it's an adverbial participle. So we can take it as an adverb here and translate it as leavingly. Rather than meditating leavingly, vittidadu unnalai visedamam. That is meditating unleavingly. I mean, he describes what is meditating unleavingly. He describes how it is. Aru ne vichipol, like a river or the falling of ghee. Ghee is clarified butter. So if it's in a melted condition, it's like a thick oil. So if you pour it, it comes in a steady flow. So like a river or the falling of ghee. So the meditation should be continuous, which should be unbroken, like a river or the falling of ghee. That is superior. So what he means by vittu karuttal, that's meditating leavingly, is meditating interruptedly. If we are meditating on God with love, if our meditation is often interrupted by other thoughts, if we're often distracted by other thoughts, why are we distracted? Because of we are more interested in those other thoughts than we are interested in meditating on God. So if our meditation is frequently interrupted by other thoughts, distracting our attention away from the thought of God, that is a result of our insufficient love for him. That is why Bhagavan says, rather than interrupted meditation, the uninterrupted meditation is more beneficial, because if our meditation is uninterrupted, if we're meditating on God without any break, without any pause, without any interruption, that is a clear sign of the intensity of our love for God. So the extent to which our meditation is uninterrupted is an indication of the extent to which we have true love for God. And it's, as I said earlier, the key to all these forms of niṭkāmiya karma, with pūjai, japa, and dhiyāṉa, the key is the love for God. Niṭkāmiya karma means action done without desire. Why would we do any action without desire? There must be something motivating us. What motivates us is the love for God. So if the stronger, more intense our love for God, the more uninterrupted our meditation will be. The less our meditation will be, the less we'll be distracted by any other thoughts. That is why he says that the uninterrupted meditation is more effective than interrupted meditation. And he ends visedamam. Visedam means it is superior or better. Then the final word is unnavai. Unnavai we can take either as it's a better way to meditate. Unnavai we can take as to meditate. So visedamam unnavai, that is a better way to meditate. We can also take unnavai to mean when considered. So it's superior when considered, in the sense that, and in what sense is it better or superior? In the sense that it's a more effective means to purify the mind, because that is the subject of all these verses. So from verses 4 to 7, Bhagavan is grading all these different types of niṭkāmiya karma. Action done by body, speech, and mind. Each is more effective than the previous one. And within each, there are different grades. The best of all is meditation, but within meditation, uninterrupted meditation is better than interrupted meditation. So up to here, Bhagavan is talking about actions. That is, puja, japa, and dhyāna, they're all actions. So basically, from the first verse up to verse 7, Bhagavan is talking about action. But action is not the means to liberation. The means to liberation is self-investigation. That is, he first touches upon that in verse 8. So that's why this series, I take 3 to 8 as one series of verses. What he says in verse 8 is, Anya bhavatin abhanavam ahum ananya bhavame undīpaṛa anaitinam uttamam mundīpaṛa. So this is a conclusion of this series of verses. Anya bhavatin means rather than anya bhava. Anya bhava means meditating on something other, something that is other. That means implies other than oneself. Anya bhavatin abanaham ahum ananya bhavame. Ananya bhavame means certainly ananya bhava. Ananya bhava means meditating on what is not other than oneself. Ananya means not other. It implies not other than oneself. Abanaham ahum means in which he is I. Anaitinam uttamam. It is best among all. So what Bhagavan is saying here is, rather than meditating on God as something, the implication is, Anya Bhava here implies meditating on God as something other than oneself. So long as we consider God to be something other than ourselves, when we meditate upon him, we're meditating on something, some object, something other than ourselves. Rather than that, Ananya Bhava, meditation on what is not other than oneself, in which he is I. That is, if we have the conviction that God is that which is shining in us as I, then our meditation on God ceases to be a meditation on any external form, and it becomes meditation only on I. That is, if God is what is what is shining in us as I, the best way to meditate on him is to meditate on nothing other than I. In other words, to meditate on I alone. And Bhagavan says, that is anaitinam uttamam, that is best among all. What does he mean by best among all? It's best in the sense that it's the most effective of all means to purify the mind. But among all means all practices of bhakti in this context. It can also mean all varieties of meditation. And it can also mean, more broadly, all kinds of spiritual practice. So among all kinds of spiritual practice, this Ananya Bhava is the best. Why is it the best? Because it's the most effective in purifying the mind. Not only is it most effective in purifying the mind, it is the only means to eradicate ego, which is, we purify mind with the aim to ultimately surrender the ego, which is because ego is the root of all impurities. So long as ego survives, the mind cannot be perfectly pure so long as ego survives. With all impurities, the impurities in the mind are Vishaya vasanas. That is the desire or the inclination or the taste to be aware of things other than ourselves. Who has that desire? Who has that taste to attend to other things? Who has that inclination to attend to other things? That is only ego. So the root of all impurities is ego. So ego is, so long as ego survives, the mind is not perfectly pure. Perfectly pure mind is when ego is eradicated. What then remains is pure awareness. That pure awareness alone is a perfectly pure mind. But because of the eradication of ego, it's no longer mind. It's just pure awareness. So the reason the Ananya Bhava is the best among all, not only is it the most effective means to purify the mind, but it's also the only means to eradicate ego. So that's why Bhagavan in a later verse, in verse 17, he refers to self-investigation as the direct path. Markum ner ākkum. It's a direct path for all. So why is it the direct path? Because it's not only removing all other impurities, it's removing the root of all impurities, which is ego. So that's why he said this is the best among all. One important thing to understand here, but I'll talk about this more next time. Next time I'll be talking about this verse and the next two verses. That's verses 8, 9, and 10. Whereas, so long as we are meditating on God as something other than ourselves, our attention is moving away from ourselves towards something other. So such meditation is a mental activity. When we turn our attention back to attend to I alone, ego subsides. So attending to I is not an action, it is a cessation of action. It is the subsidence of all action. So Ananya Baba, strictly speaking, is not a niṭkāmiya karma because it's not a karma. So this is where, that's why this is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. All other bhakti practices involve some type of action. That is, puja is an action, japa is an action, dhiyāṉa is dhiyāṉa in the sense of meditation on anything other than ourselves is an action. But meditation on I alone, on nothing other than oneself, that is not an action. That is clearly explained by Bhagavan in the next verse, but I'll deal with that in more detail next time. So if you would like to ask any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Sort of a quick summary of, I made the note on a slide, so let me just share it, if you don't mind. So this I just captured sort of 4 to 7 in this sequence. So basically, you're saying that loud voice japa is better than puja, and then whispering japa is better than loud voice japa, and then even better than whisper japa is meditation sort of interrupted by thoughts, and then even better is uninterrupted meditation.
Yeah, but you missed out one thing.
The 8th one.
No. In verse 5, verse 6, vaṛi.
Right, praising God.
The praising that implies singing hymns aloud.
Where would you frame that? Like,
that is better than puja.
That's better than puja. Okay.
But the loud japa is better than that.
Okay. So in my mind, I'm always thinking the praising God as a part of puja. But you can actually just do puja without really praising God. Right?
Yeah. Well, you can. But I mean, you can. Puja usually involves some sort of mantras or some words of praise. It's usually involved in puja, but you can just be singing hymns of praise without doing any physical action.
Right.
Except so it can be purely by speech.
Right.
So among the speech, that's among the japa, the grossest form is just singing hymns of praise. More subtle is doing japa in a loud voice. But japa, why japa is more effective than the hymns of praise? Hymns of praise can be descriptions of God and his glories and everything. Japa is just the repetition of his name or some mantra that contains his name. like Namah Shivaya. Yeah, it's a simpler form of praise, you can say.
Right. So on the rightmost will be like even better than uninterrupted meditation would be Ananya Bhava.
Yes, yes.
Is Bhava of God, none other than you.
Yeah, yeah.
So just thought maybe a pictorial looking at it will make it easy for us. And then I wanted to read those verses. Yesterday, actually, it's so interesting. Just yesterday, I came across this verse of Devi Galotram. And I immediately thought, wow, this will be very powerful to go with these Upadēśa Undiyār verses. So for those who are not familiar, Devi Galotram is a scripture in the Agama Shastras, and it contains the teachings of Lord Shiva to Devi Parvati. So in that, I think Shanti's got an English translation there. So I'll ask her to read verse 15, 16, and 17. And 15, you can just read the first paragraph, please. And then 16 and 17, and I'll let Michael comment after that. Unmute. Yeah. Got it? No, I can't hear you. So, okay, that's fine. I'll make a gist of it. Basically, in those verses, Lord Shiva is saying that do not waste your time focusing on rituals or on on the chakras. Don't waste your time focusing on the chakras. Don't waste your time on puja. And he is very direct and explicit on this, and don't even waste time on dhiyāṉa. So that's sort of the gist of those three verses. And I thought it was very powerful.
He mentions not only chakras, but also nadis.
Exactly.
The whole yoga system. He's saying, I don't know, I found a translation here in Collected Works. I'll just read verse 14 before, but what he's talking about in the previous verse is about I and am. And saying that we should meditate only on I and am is the implication, I think, of the previous few verses. Then he says, instead of following this direct path, and in Tamil, Bhagavan, when he made it into Kalibemba, he added ahate natadu, which means not having liking for what is within, or having liking for I. Do not ever contemplate in the least upon chakras, nadis, deities associated with the lotus seats, mantraksharas, that the letters of the mantras, diverse mandala murtis, the God aspects, starting from those controlling the sun, Surya Mandala, the moon, Chandra Mandala, fire, Agni Mandala. That's added in brackets.
Yeah.
And then in 16, he says, those who seek everlasting liberation need not endeavor to practice repetition and countless verse mantras, repeating verse mantras and methods of yoga such as breath control, pranayama, breath retention, kumbhaka, and concentration. And in verse 17, he says, there is no room for performing puja, worship of deities, namaskaram, paying homage like prostration, japa, incarnation, dhiyāṉa, contemplation, and so on. Hear from me that the highest truth acclaimed by the Vedas can be known only through jnana, and hence there is absolutely no need to know anything outside of oneself. Can I comment on this?
Yes, please.
Though these are in a way connected with this subject, what Bhagavan is saying in these verses of Upadēśa Undiyār is more subtle, because Bhagavan first qualifies. Bhagavan isn't against puja, japa, dhiyāṉa, or any of these things, but he first qualifies, in order to be an effective means of purifying the mind, it must be niṭkāmiya, that is, it mustn't be done with the expectation of any personal gain, any personal result, and it must be, in order to do any action without that desire for any gain, it must be done with love for God. That love for God is the key. That is it isn't in verse, is what's implied by the first words of verse 3, karuttaṉukku ākkum, done for God. I mean, implies done for the love of God. That is the key to all the next, from verses 3 to 7, the key is that love for God. How all these actions can purify the mind, it's not the actions that purify the mind, it's the love with which we do them. And why they are graded in this order? Because the more focus, the more love we have for God, the less we, that is, puja, physical worship, is a relatively gross expression of love for God. If we have deep love for God, we won't be even feel inclined to do the puja. When in the early days when Murugan came to the ashram, because he was a Brahmin, and in those days there were very few people in the ashram, at one time they gave him the job of doing puja in Padacchēdam temple. Murugan couldn't do the puja. He couldn't. He said, "How you ring the bell and wave the thing," and he found it completely confusing. He said, "I'm totally unfit for this puja," because his bhakti is on a far higher level. So for someone whose bhakti is at such a level, to ask them to do this gross form of worship is totally inappropriate. But for some people at the beginning stages, when we're first developing love for God, then doing puja is appropriate. But as the love develops, we'll feel less inclination for all these outward things, and we'll just be satisfied with chanting the name of God in our heart. At first, we may be chanting the name of God aloud, Ramana, 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 Namah Shivaya, Arunachala Shiva, whatever. We may first like to do it aloud, but after some time, we won't even feel inclined to do it aloud. We want to do it softly, then we want to do it mentally. So as the love matures, the actions by which we express our love will become more and more internalized, more and more subtle. And eventually we won't, even this japa will not appeal to us. We'll just want to meditate on the thought of God. And at first our meditation, because we still have some desires and attachments, our meditation may sometimes be distracted. But the more the love matures, the more the meditation will become undistracted meditation. And when we reach a certain point, when we want to give ourselves wholly to God, then we will get the clarity to understand, who am I to give myself to God? What is this I am to give to God? Is there anything other than God? When He alone is, who am I? Bhagavan expresses that very beautifully in verse, in Arunachala Patikam, in one verse. Wait a second. Which verse is it? Yes, verse 7 of Arunachala Patikam, Bhagavan expresses this very beautifully. Veli veliti nir man pala uira viri uru Buddha, Bodhika, Belioli, Unne, Andri, Indru, Enin, Beru, Yan, Ulam. That is, if the Buddhas, the 5 elements, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth, and Bodhikas, everything composed of these elements, which expand or spread out or unfold as many living beings, do not exist beside you, or do not exist as other than you, the space of light. Who else am I? So as the bhakti matures, as the bhakti develops and becomes more, it becomes deeper and more pure, we will want nothing other than to give ourselves, even to meditate on, we won't even want to meditate on God. We'll just want to give ourselves to God, wholly give ourselves to God. Meditation may be the closest we can come to that, but no, I want to, even this, I don't want even to give my thought to God. I want to give myself to God. But then when we want to give ourselves to God, then who is this I that I want to give to God? Who am I to surrender myself to God? So when He alone is everything, what am I? Am I something separate from Him, but I can give myself to Him? So it's at that point that the Anya Bhava turns to be an Anya Bhava. We understand, oh, I am nothing other than God. What is shining in me as that is God. So there's this seemingly separate entity who wants to surrender itself to God, that I that wants to surrender itself to God. What is that I other than God? And then he continues in that verse, Vimala, Beliada Ulatu, Verara Vilangin, Veru Ena Veli Varuvain A. That is, O blemishless, if you shine without another in the heart, as that space here refers to the space of pure awareness, who am I who have come out as if another? That is, veru ena, that means like another, or as if other, veli varuvain, who am I who have come out as if another? And then he ends by saying, Veli Vara, this is a beautiful, beautiful prayer. Veli Varai Arunachala, Avantalayil, Virimala, Padattine Vete. Oh Arunachala, come out. That means come out from my heart, placing your vast lotus feet on his head. That means on the head of this ego. So even to surrender ourselves to him, we are powerless, because who are we other than him? He has to manifest himself and with his big lotus feet press the head of this ego down and crush the ego. This is, of course, put in a metaphorical language and poetic language. What that means is Arunachala has to reveal himself as that pure awareness, and that will crush this ego. Ego will be crushed only when it sees who am I, what it actually is. So it's a very, very beautiful verse. But this verse also gives us a clue to the advanced level of bhakti. How the Anya Bhava switches to an Anya Bhava. That is, when we truly want to surrender ourselves to God, then the question arises that how can we surrender ourselves without knowing ourselves? We have to know ourselves before we can surrender ourselves. So, but who am I other than God? There's no I other than God. God is that which is shining in me as I. As he says in this verse 8, Avanahamahum. Avanahamahum Ananya Bhavam. That means the Ananya Bhava in which he is I, in which we've recognized that God is nothing other. God is that which is shining in us as I. There is no I other than God. So to meditate upon God correctly is to meditate only on I, not on anything else. Meditating on any form of God is meditating on a thought, on something other than I. As Bhagavan indicates in verse 4, Ennuru, they're all material forms, all all forms are nothing but thoughts, nothing but mental phenomena. So God is that which is shining in us as I. So to meditate upon him correctly is only to meditate on I. That is why he says, meditating on I is the best among all. So all whatever spiritual practice we may do, ultimately it will be beneficial only to the extent to which it leads us to this ultimate path of self-investigation, of ananya bhava, meditating on nothing other than I.
Thank you, Michael.
So compared to that, these verses of Devi Kalotram, but outright criticize puja, or yoga, all these things. Bhagavan isn't outright criticized. At a certain, what is said in Devi Kalotram is appropriate to people at a certain level. When people have come to a certain level, we have to leave all this puja, japa and things. But Bhagavan isn't saying that in here in Upadēśa Undiyār. He's saying, this is better than this is better than this is better than this. If we are wise, what do we take from, there are some people who say, oh, Bhagavan has approved all paths. Bhagavan has approved puja, he's approved japa. Yes, he's approved them all. Bhagavan approves everything in its own proper context. But what does he say is best of all? Ananya bhava, self-investigation. That alone is best of all. That is the aim of these verses. So, but what is said in Devi Kalotram is at a certain stage of people who are very much, who are too much absorbed in all these complex practices. At a certain stage, they have to be told, give up all these practices, attend only to I. For God is shining in you only as I. So it is in a way connected with these verses, but it's not the point that Bhagavan is making in these verses. In these verses, verses 3 to 8, the subject is purification of mind. And how the mind is purified by niṭkāmiya karma, but is explained in verses 4 to 7. But beyond the niṭkāmiya karma, that is bhakti, but so long as bhakti is being expressed in action, with action of body, speech, or mind, that is a niṭkāmiya karma. If it's done with true love for God, it's a niṭkāmiya karma. But we have to go beyond karma, because karma is bondage. We have to go beyond karma. So that's why Bhagavan said, liberation is not attained by doing anything, but by just being. How to just be? So long as we rise as ego, we cannot, our very rising as ego is an interruption of being, so to speak. The being, of course, is never interrupted, but the state of just being is interrupted by our rising. Even when we rise, we still are. So being is always there. Being is the ground, the base from which we rise. So without the being, there could be no rising. But so long as we are rising, we are not just being. And so long as we are rising, there is no liberation. We have to return. The nature of liberation is pure being, pure awareness. Being and awareness are one and the same. So it's only by just being that we can attain liberation. The whole thrust of Upadēśa Undiyār from beginning to end is action is not the way. Being is alone the path to liberation. Action, if it is done without desire and with love for God, it can purify the mind and lead to this path of just being. But in order to achieve just being, how to achieve just being? I will talk about this more in more detail next time when I talk about 8, 9, and 10. Because in 9, he very clearly says, but just being in that state by the strength of by the bhava balatina, that means by the strength of meditation. What meditation is he referring to there? He's not referring to anya bhava, he's referring to ananya bhava. So by the intensity of our meditation on I, the ego subsides and we remain in the state of just being. That is parabhakti tattva. And he says in verse 10, that is karma, bhakti, yoga, and jnana. All these, ultimately, all these paths lead to, must lead to it must lead to this self-investigation, because only by self-investigation will ego subside. So surrender is possible only by self-investigation.
Thank you, Michael. There is a question here. From your nice lecture, I get that love for God is key, but can love for God itself be defined, or is it just abstract and subjective? In other words, what is love for God? You kind of mentioned this just now, but I know you will be talking about it in verse 9 also, but
yes.
So you can just tell us whatever you can now.
Some things cannot be expressed in words. One thing we all know is I am. But that is, I am is that is our expression of our self-awareness. That in the words I am denote our self-awareness. We are aware of ourselves. Can we describe what is self-awareness? We know what the word self-awareness means. It means awareness of ourselves. But can we describe it? We can't even describe a gross thing like what's the taste of chocolate or what's the taste of a mango. We can't really describe it. It's only when you experience it that you can know it. So if we can't describe even gross things like that, we certainly can't describe I am. Love is our real nature, according to Bhagavan. So to know love, we must know ourselves. To the extent that we surrender ourselves, to that extent we will know what love is. However, to put it in simple, to try to, though I cannot say what love for God is, I can say what is the measure of true love. If you love a person, if you're married, you have a husband or wife, or if you're a child, you love your parents or whatever. If you love any person, whether a friend or a relative or whatever, to the extent that we love someone, we will want to, if we truly love someone, we're not looking to what we can gain from that person. We want to give to that person, not to take from them. Love is all about giving. And the highest form of love is to give oneself. So what is love for God? True love for God is nothing but self-surrender. The extent to which we are willing to surrender ourselves, to give ourselves wholly to God, that is the indicator of true love for God. So that willingness to surrender ourselves, that is love for God. So even when we're doing the Anya Bhava, even when we're meditating on God as other than ourselves, I mean, the whole bhakti, true bhakti means when we're, puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa are not bhakti. They can be expressions of bhakti, but bhakti means love. Puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa, most people who do puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa are not doing it for the love of God. They're doing it for they have some kāmiya motive. It's a kāmiyata, a form of kāmiyata. So it's not the action that it determines whether it's love for God. It is only if it is done without any desire for any gain, any personal gain, purely for the love of God, that is true, that is bhakti. And bhakti is all about giving. Love is all about giving. So when we start off on this path of true bhakti, I'm not talking about the gross forms of puja, japa, and dhiyāṇa done for other purposes. I'm talking only about niṭkāmiya bhakti puja, true bhakti, niṭkāmiya puja, japa, and dhiyāṇa. We are trying to give ourselves. That is when you're doing puja, a lot of the ritual puja is offering things to God. You offer food to God, you offer you give a bath to God, you give clothing to God. This, I mean, the temple, when they do all these rituals, they are giving, they are offering to God. And eventually after you've given him bath and put on beautiful cloth and garlands and everything, finally you wave the light. It's all symbolic giving to God. Because surrender is all about giving. So when we start off on the Bhakti Marga, we become aware why we are not always thinking of God, because we've got so much desire for other things. So we are trying to give up our desires. We're trying to give up our attachments. We're trying to have desire and attachment only for God. So slowly, slowly, we are giving up our desires. We're giving up our thing. But as we progress on this path of bhakti, we are seeking to give more and more and more. But how can we give up all our desires so long as we retain this separate individuality? So long as I feel I am separate from God, there's still that attachment to my individuality. So we must be willing not only to surrender everything that is mine, we must be willing to surrender the I whose mine it is. So the path of bhakti is progressively coming closer and closer to surrendering I. First we surrender the gross things, that in puja we are offering material things to God. In japa, we are trying to focus our attention on the name of God. At first we may do it aloud, later we may be satisfied just doing it softly in the mouth, later we'll be satisfied just mentally repeating the name of God. But we are trying to focus our love on God, we're trying to give our love to God. And then we come to meditation. It's still more, but in meditation we become more and more aware of how often our mind gets distracted and drawn away to other things. So why does our mind get attracted and distracted and drawn towards other things? Because of my desires and attachment. Because I'm more concerned about other things than I am about God. I keep on leaving my meditation on God and thinking of other things. So we come closer and closer to giving up our desires and attachment and thinking only of God. But when we think only of God, our love for God becomes so much. So who am I separate? If God is everything, if all these 8 forms are God, then who am I separate from God? So this is Bhagavan beautifully describing in these verses how the love for God matures through different stages and is expressed through different stages. But ultimately, the ultimate gift, the ultimate surrender is not just surrender of mind. It's when we're ready to surrender I. That is the true, that is the ultimate self-surrender. But how to surrender I? The nature of ego, as Bhagavan explained in so many places in Ākdu and elsewhere, the nature of ego is to rise by attending to anything other than itself. But if it attends to itself, it subsides. This is something that in all the, I mean, I haven't read, I've hardly read even a drop of the vast ocean of Advaitic texts. But nowhere has it been emphasized so much as so clearly as Bhagavan. I don't even know if it's been explicitly stated in any of the old texts, but the nature of ego is to rise by grasping form, by Upadēśa Undiyār. Grasping form, it comes into existence. Upadēśa, grasping form, it stands. Upadēśa Undiyār. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes, it expands greatly. Uru victu urupatram, leaving one form, it grasps another form. Hedinal autum pidicum, if sought, it takes flight. Urupatra peya 100, this formless phantom ego. So the nature, the ego has no form of its own. But it comes into existence by grasping a form, by grasping the form of a body as I. it comes into existence. Continue to grasp this form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on other forms, it flourishes. And if it leaves one form, it grasps another form. As soon as we leave this form, we grasp some other form. When we fall asleep, we leave this form. But then we begin dreaming, we grasp some other form. So the nature of ego is form grasping, urupatri, the form grasping is the very nature of ego. But ego itself has no form of its own. So if ego tries to grasp itself, whereas it rises by grasping form, it subsides by trying to grasp itself, because it has no form of its own. That's what he means by Tedinal autum pidicum. It's sought, it takes flight. So if ego turns its attention back to itself, it subsides. So this is verse 25 of Lundīpaṟa. In this verse, Bhagavan has explained very, very clearly what is the nature of ego. Ego comes into existence, stands and flourishes by grasping form. That means grasping things other than itself, because it itself has no form of its own. So form means things other than itself. So it's by grasping things other than itself that ego comes into existence, stands and flourishes. But if it tries to grasp itself, if it seeks itself, if it attends to itself, it subsides. So how is ego to surrender itself? Only by self-investigation. That's why he says in Nana, in paragraph 13 of Nana, in the first sentence, he says, he explains what is giving oneself to God, what is surrendering oneself to God. Anma chintane tabira, vera chintane kaṇbikku, satram idum kodamal, apmanishta paranai irpadei, tane isanakku alipadam. That means, anmanishta tabira, except anma chintane tabira, except thought of oneself. Atma chintana literally means thought of oneself. It means contemplation on oneself, meditation on oneself, or self-attentiveness. Other than self-attentiveness, vera chintane kaṇbikku satram idam kadama, not giving even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than thought of oneself or self-attentiveness. Apmanishta paranai irpadei, being apmanishta paran. Apmanishta paran means one who is completely fixed in as oneself. So how to be apmanishta paran? By giving no room to rising of any thought other than thought of oneself. That is, if we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we give no room for our attention to be distracted by anything else, no other thought can rise. Thoughts arise only when we attend to them. Without our attention, no thought can rise. So if we attend only to ourselves, there'll be no room for any other thought to arise. And thereby we remain apmanishta paran. And thus being apmanishta paran, tane isanakku alipadam. That alone is giving oneself to God. He says, iripadei, iripadu means being, iripadei means being, that alone is giving oneself to God. That intensifier implies alone. So only being apmanishta paran, giving not even the slightest room to the arising of any thought other than atmachintana, alone is giving oneself to God. So how are we to surrender ourselves to God? Only by attending to ourselves. That is the implication of that sentence, and that is the reason for that is very clearly explained by Bhagavan in verse 25 of Lundīpaṛa, because the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to things other than itself. So only when it attends to itself will it subside. So ultimately, this is why he says in verse 8, Ananya Bhava is Anaitinam Uttamam, that is best of all. So all that Bhagavan says about puja, japa, and dhyāna in verses 4 to 7, it's all to show how these other practices can gradually purify the mind and eventually lead to self-investigation. But how do we? Why is self-investigation the most effective means to purify the mind? Why is it best among all? Because the impurities in the mind are the Vishaya vasanas. That's the inclination to attend to things other than ourselves. So the most effective way to give up that inclination to attend to other things is to attend to oneself. The more we cultivate this liking to attend to ourselves, the more our inclination to attend to other things will drop off. But how is purification achieved by other means? By puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa? Well, it's not achieved by puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa. It's achieved by the love with which we do puja, japa, and dhiyāṉa. Because all these practices, the aim of all these practices is to focus our love on God. The more we think of God, the less we will be inclined to think of other things. But so long as we take God to be something other than ourselves, there's still a shortcoming, because we're still attending to something other than ourselves. Even that God we take to be other than ourselves is not the true God. It's our idea of God. So even that God is a Vishaya, in the sense that he's something other than ourselves. So long as we take God to be anything other than ourselves, our love for him is imperfect. If we want to have perfect love for God, we have to recognize, who am I other than you? As Bhavan says so beautifully in verse 7 of Arunachya Patikam. If all these are just a manifestation of you, then who am I? Who else am I other than you? So the bhakti, the pinnacle of the path of bhakti is self-surrender. The pinnacle, or is surrender. The pinnacle of surrender is self-investigation. Because self-investigation is the direct means to surrender, to bring about the subsidence of ego. And surrender and subsidence of ego are one and the same thing.
So it is an experience. The love is it's not something you describe with words. It's an experience.
Even to say it's an experience, yeah, no words can adequately say. Yes, it is an experience in a sense, but it's not generally when we talk about experience, experiences are things that come and go. The only experience that never comes and goes is the experience I am. So that is, the experience I am is something quite unlike all other experiences. But the love is nothing. If we want to know what love is, we have to know what I is. Because in order to love, I have to love. Then who is that I who is to love? If we investigate this I, we will find that I is nothing but love. And who are we to love? There's no other. Because when we know our real nature, there is no other. There is only God, who is what is shining in us as I. So we can say there's only God, there's no I, in the sense that there's no ego. Or we can say there's only ego, or we can say there's only I, no God. I in that means our real nature. Because what God is nothing other than our real nature, nothing other than what we actually are.
Right. So I have a couple of questions. One is from Lakshmi. So her question is, so Lakshmi, you got on. You want to ask the question? Go ahead.
Yes. Namaste, Michael G. Very, very happy to hear from you directly. The first question I have is, when, say, anybody, if I love a person so much, my children or my parents or whoever it is, what I do to them out of love, like feeding them, cooking for them, or taking care of them when they're not well, is not different from how much love I have for them, that when I think of them. So I want to know what you think about, like, how is doing puja separate from how much love I have for God? Because I personally think that although lately I've been having a lot of trouble giving, I consider myself, since I'm made by God, and since things I use to do puja are also made by God, I find it very difficult to give what's God's to himself. But although I feel that way, when I do, like, I do eat and I wear clothes, and I use things that are made by him. And so what I'm taking for myself, if I offer to him first and then I take, I feel happy to do that. So is that considered lowly, like not to par with bhakti? Because whatever I'm doing, I want to offer to him and then eat or take. So how is it different? Why is puja lower? And in terms of the second question I had was wearing vibhuti, which is to remind myself that this is what it is. It's not don't take yourself too seriously. I feel, because my ego does come up, I do feel very, I sing well and I do things, and it does sometimes come back that I'm, oh, you sing well, oh, you. So I have to remind myself by wearing the vibhuti and stuff. So it also comes from puja. You offer to Shiva and then you wear. So why is doing puja lower compared to the affection I have for God? If you don't mind, please explain.
Okay. You started by talking about the love for your children, your family. When you are taking care of your children, for example, you are giving them your time, you're giving them your attention, you're giving them your care. But one thing you cannot give them is yourself. Because likewise in puja, when we are giving to God, we can give material things, but we are not able to completely give ourselves. So at the level of puja, that is why when we, because material, puja is an action of the body. It's a material thing. What is important in the puja is the love with which we do it. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, for example, he used to do puja, but can the puja done by Ramakrishna Paramahamsa be in any way compared to the puja done by ordinary people? It cannot. Why? Because ordinary people may do exactly the same rituals, but the love with which he did it was so much greater. So it's the love is the key. So what Bhagavan is talking about in these verses, he's talking about how the love is refined. When we, at a certain stage, because Ramakrishna Paramahamsa came with a certain divine mission. So he came with the mission to basically give a seal of approval to a wide range of practices. So in his life, he did puja. Later on, I don't think he did puja. So it was at a certain stage through because he went through different stages in order to exemplify all these different paths. But what Bhagavan is talking about here in Upadēśa Undiyār, but when we have love for God and we want to express our love for God, naturally we want to give to God. So the first way we want to offer material things. So it's at that level that puja is appropriate. But as our love gets refined, we, like you said, you have certain doubts. who am I to give these things to God? Because they're all God's anyway. Bhagavan used to tell a beautiful story. There was a poor wayfarer. He may have been a traveling salesman or something, but anyway, he was a great devotee of Ganapati, and he would never like to take his meal without worshipping Ganapati. And one day he was in a situation where he usually carried a small vigraha of Ganapati with him, but somehow he got separated from that vigraha of Ganapati. So he wanted to worship Ganapati. So he had a little bit of jaggery. I'm sure you know what jaggery is. For those who don't know, jaggery is raw cane sugar, basically just a cake of sugar. So he molded that cake of sugar into the form of Ganapati, and he worshipped that form. But then he wanted to do Naivedya, he wanted to offer. But all the jaggery, usually he would offer the jaggery as an offering, but all the jaggery he had made into the form of Ganesha. So he had no jaggery left to offer. Then he pinched off the toe of Ganesha and offered it to Ganesha. So why Bhagavan said that is, we want to surrender to God what is already God's. So yeah, as our love gets more and more refined, we will feel, who am I to offer all these things to God? They're all God's anyway. So as the love progresses, we seek more and more appropriate ways to express our love for God. So do I have to do all these outward rituals to express my love for God? Why not I just repeat his name? So we come to japa, and we feel more satisfied just repeating his name than all these outward rituals. That doesn't mean we have to totally give up the outward rituals, but we feel more satisfaction in just repeating his name. And rather than repeating his name aloud, at first it feels nice to repeat the name aloud. But after some time, why should I repeat it aloud? Let me keep it within, so we whisper it more softly. We don't want others to notice. We want to be unknown to the world. We want our love to be for God alone. And then as the love gets more refined, it's not even necessary to say it softly within mouth. Mentally repeating his name is sufficient for us. Because the more we repeat it mentally, our mind is more focused on it. So we find more satisfaction. We feel we're expressing our love better by just repeating his name mentally. Bhagavan says that is japa. Sorry, that is dhiyāṇa. This is dhiyāṇa. Mental japa is dhiyāṇa. But then when we are repeating his name, we find often our attention is getting distracted by other things because our love isn't yet refined enough. So we do this more and more until our love becomes more and more refined, and slowly, slowly the interruptions become less, and we're able to focus more keenly on his name alone. And but eventually we come to a point where we understand I'm repeating the name of God, but God is that which is manifested as all these things. So who am I separate from him? As Bhagavan expresses in that verse 7 of Arunachala Patikam. So eventually we come from this Anya Bhava, we are drawn to be Ananya Bhava. We recognize that God is that which is shining in us as I. All these outward things, all outward forms, even the forms of God, they appear and disappear. We can worship the form or the name of God only in waking and dream. Can we do so in sleep? But what remains in sleep? That must be the true form of God. That is pure awareness. That is what is always shining in us as I. So as the love gets refined, we draw more away from other things back towards I. Because I alone is that which is permanent, that which is ever shining, ever unchanging. So that is the true form of God. So but what Bhagavan is indirectly talking about in these verses, he's not putting down puja, he's not putting down japa, he's not putting down dhiyāṇa. He's talking about how when the love is refined, we go through these different stages, and eventually we come to this path of self-investigation, or ananya bhava, as he calls it in verse 8. So it doesn't mean that it's not that there's any wrong with puja. It will appeal to us at a certain stage, but as our love gets more and more refined, we'll be more and more drawn to more inward practices. Does that adequately answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Yes. The other thing I had was I would, as long as I hold this body, as long as I'm in this body, I'm going to eat. I will be eating, and I will be doing all the things. I would like to do it as a service. Like, I would like to even offer that to God. Like, if I'm feeding the kids, if I'm feeding myself, or whatever it is, I would like to offer even the food and everything to God first, and then eat. So is that,
No, that's perfectly okay. Bhagavan says, if you're doing it, Enoru yavam ireyuru amena, anybody padal undīpaṛa, isan nal pusane undīpaṛa. Bhagavan approves of it. He said it's good worship of God. If you're doing it with that love, it is very good. But don't stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Puja is good, but don't limit yourself just to puja. Also do some japa, also do some meditation, and also, most importantly of all, do ananya bhava, meditate on I, because I is the true form of God.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your answer.
Right.
Kumar, I have a question. Can I ask?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Kumar or Michael, this is Ram here. I've been doing, Michael, I've been doing some form of spiritual practice like the ones we talked about today for about at least about 24 years now, starting in '96. I myself am unable to figure out if I made any progress. Obviously, we talked about it before. I don't know if I'm in a position to gauge my progress, but I feel I probably has made very limited progress. But is that a cause of concern at all, or I should keep chugging along the path?
We cannot measure how much progress we're making, and we need not measure. We know what the path is, and so long as we are following the path, we are going in the correct direction. So yes, you just have to continue plugging along, but you will find as you go along, as Bhagavan has indicated in these verses, as you go along, the love gets refined, and as the love gets refined, we are drawn away from the more gross forms of expression. That doesn't mean we totally have to give up puja or japa or anything, but slowly we find we are drawn to the more subtle forms, the more inward forms of expression of love. And the most inward form of expression is meditating on I. So if we want to progress as fast as possible, we should meditate on I as much as possible. Other ways are also ways of progressing, but they're slower. That is what Bhagavan is talking about here. When he says each is better than the other, we can express it in another way by saying puja is a slow way, japa is a slightly faster way, meditation is a slightly faster way, but fastest of all is ananya bhava, meditation only on nothing other than ourselves. So if you want to, if you're concerned about your progress, then you should incline more to the faster methods. The faster method. I mean, if you want to travel to India quickly, you can also travel by bicycle and by a rowing boat if you want to. But if you're eager to reach India, better to take a faster route. You can take a car or an airplane, or so. There are. If we really want to progress in this path, if we're eager to progress, we should take the faster routes, the fastest route of all, the jet travel, the Concorde travel, is the path of self-investigation. The other paths are also leading in the same direction, but very much more slowly. And ultimately, we have to come to this path. What Bhagavan said, there may be many roads leading to the city, but there's only one gate to enter. And that gate is very low. You have to bend down to get in it. That means ego has to subside. That is the path of self-investigation, is that gateway.
Thanks, Michael.
And then when he said very slowly, that could involve a few extra births.
Yeah. Well, we can't measure all these things, but all we know, Bhagavan has very clearly stated which is, he's graded all these methods as this is better, this is better, this is better, this is best of all. Best of all is self-investigation, ananya bhava, meditating on nothing other than ourselves.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. That was good, nice explanation. So I think we went over a little bit, which is good. So people had time to ask questions. We'll come back again and discuss next month on verse 9 and 10, right, Michael?
No, 8, 9, and 10.
8, 9, and 10, right? 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah,
8,
9 is meaningless without 8. So we have to, that's why, like I talked about verse 3 I concluded last time with verse 3 and began this time with verse 3, because the sequence is very important. I mean, the connection between the consecutive verses is very, very important. So next time it'll be 8 to 10.